Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, How Fintechs Can Balance Innovation and Compliance. We're excited you can join us. My name is Danny Bradbury and I'll be moderating today's event. Now today we're diving deep into one of the fintech industry's biggest challenges, how to move fast but without breaking things. Today's fintechs operate in a highly competitive industry and they need to innovate at a breakneck pace. At the same time, they face a complex web of regulations that they have to navigate carefully. The webinar sponsor, Semgrep, has been working hard on refining software to help them solve one aspect of this problem, application security. Fintechs rely heavily on software to keep transactions operating smoothly and seamlessly. We know that all software has vulnerabilities, especially when you're constantly enhancing it to provide better performance and more functionality. So how do you ensure those vulnerabilities don't run afoul of regulatory requirements? How do you balance innovation with software risk, especially in a world as heavily regulated as fintech? We have two speakers to help us unpack all of this today. Allow me to introduce Dahan Altas, Head of Product at Semgrep, and Elliot Colquhoun, VP of Information Security and IT at Airwallex. Before we talk with them, though, I have just a few housekeeping items. Please note the slides will advance automatically throughout the presentation. To enlarge the slides, click the Enlarge Slides button located in the top right-hand corner of the presentation window. If you need technical assistance, click on the Help widget located on the bottom left corner of your console. We encourage you to submit questions at any time throughout the presentation using the Q&A widget at the bottom of your console. We'll try to answer these during the webcast, but if a fuller answer is needed, or if we run out of time, it will be answered later via email. Please know we do capture all questions. So to kick off, I'd like to ask each of our speakers to provide a quick overview of themselves and their work. And Dahan, maybe we can start with you.
Yes, my name is Dahan Altas. I run product team at Semgrep. I've been with Semgrep since 2018. Prior to Semgrep, I worked at Cisco Meraki for 10 plus years as a product manager. And prior to that, I had various roles in pre-sales in other organizations.
Excellent. Okay, well, pleased to meet you, Dan. Nice to have you here with us today. And Elliot, how about yourself? How did you get to where you are and what do you do?
Yeah, hi, my name's Elliot. I'm at a company called Airwallex. We're a global fintech business focusing on building global infrastructure to power other businesses. I've been in the role for about 4.5 years now, have built our security and IT teams up from basically nothing, which has been an incredibly fun challenge. Prior to that, I was leading our customer-facing cybersecurity work at Palantir.
Excellent. Okay, so you're right at the coalface here with all this stuff. So it's good to get your insights on this today. Well, let's launch in then and look at the first part of this discussion, which is the problem facing fintechs today. Do you want to look at what makes fintechs so vulnerable to regulatory issues? Elliot, maybe we can start with you on that one.
Yeah, sure. I think I wouldn't say that fintechs are necessarily vulnerable to regulatory issues. I think that there's a lot of opportunity in handling regulatory requirements in a really scalable way that allows you to build a really great user experience, but one that's also really good for your customers as well. Obviously, the work that we do is by nature in a heavily regulated industry. As you operate internationally, like a business like ours, you have many different regulations you need to comply with, and there's a lot of complexity there as well.
Okay, and I guess that the problem as well is, as I understand it, a lot of fintechs are operating on an international basis. Could you talk about how that plays into the regulatory challenges that they do face?
Yeah, of course, that's exactly right. And I think you end up with this large set of all possible regulatory requirements that you need to follow. And I think this requires a lot of diligence and understanding what those requirements are. You need like a lot of documentation to build a really solid mapping of what the requirements are, how you're solving each of them. But you also need to have really strong foundations, right? You need to have really good security building blocks because those will help you meet 90% of those regulations and often meet the spirit of what your regulators are actually requiring.
Got it. Okay. Dan, what do you think about this? What's your input?
What I like about fintech is that it's one of those, I'd say, unique industries where security is really at a equal footing with compliance. One thing that I was surprised to learn as I moved into the application security space in 2018 from the information security space, InfoSec space, is that compliance is paramount. And I'd say that almost what I've learned from CISOs, like maybe they're whispering this into my ears rather than just like putting on LinkedIn, is that compliance trumps security. Because if you lose your compliance, it's an immediate business negative outcome. Whereas security is sometimes hard to quantify. What is a tail risk? What's the impact of a SQL injection if we don't understand where the code is running, etc. Well, if you lose your SOC 2, you lose your DORA, you lose your GDPR, like any kind of a compliance issue, that's going to have an immediate business impact. That's the normal case. And the nice and interesting use case about fintech is that security is equally important as compliance because trust is everything. And people have a lot of choices and a lot of competition. They run on banks, so to speak. So having a high level of security, especially in I'd say very targeted industries like crypto space, is really, really stretching the CISOs to think, okay, well, I need to stay compliant, but I also have to have an extremely good security, and I also have to go fast because I have 5 competitors. So kind of like mixing all this together, it's a perfect storm. So I don't envy Elliot's position. It's a tough job.
Absolutely. And I guess it's not just security as well, is it? There are other digital compliance issues that people have to deal with. I'm thinking about resilience, for example. Could you talk about how resilience is taking center stage in some regions as well?
Well, I would say that probably the expert for that would be Elliot, but from our standpoint, business continuity, showing that like we look at just the other day, I was just for this little talk we're having, I was doing a little research in terms of like regulatory and compliance framework for fintech companies, and the pages kept scrolling. So there's a lot of like redundant regulations about like, cyber resilience, in terms of business continuity, in terms of safeguarding customer data, safeguarding customers' privacy. Then you layer on top of that, regulations that come from overseas like GDPR or DORA. I kind of feel like somebody has to invent a tool just so that people can actually kind of resolve all these regulatory requirements to a non-overlapping set of, okay, do this, don't do this, do this, don't do that. So staggering. In terms of the specifics that, like a given company needs to address, I'm going to defer that to Elliot, but it feels like this is a very heavily regulated industry.
One of the things, Dan, that I also think about with regards to compliance and regulation is for US companies, it's not just a federal issue anymore, isn't it? I mean, there's a lot of state level regulations that people have to contend with that may vary across state lines. Is that an issue too?
Yeah, it is. And and it's misunderstood because sometimes when a sort of a well-intentioned policy gets implemented for sort of like to advance the customer protection or, like provide a benefit to the society, it may have unintended secondary consequences. I'll give an example. The entire fintech industry in San Francisco packed up and left in early 2020 when a law got passed where the nuance wasn't well understood that they were going to get taxed not on their earnings, but on the gross receipt or like on the total transaction volume. And so Stripe used to be a San Francisco company, no more. Square, which like now it's called Block, used to be in San Francisco. So it's such a nuanced topic that even a misunderstanding of a single word can have major outcomes for societies. And San Francisco lost that those employers at that tax base. So it's important to understand the nuances of all these regulations, and they have real consequences.
Absolutely. Yeah, I seem to remember San Francisco and I think New York, scaring a lot of people in the crypto community in the early days because they had a particular approach of their own to regulations in that space as well, right? Which caused fintechs some worries. So yeah, it spans lots of different subsectors, I suppose. It's interesting stuff. So maybe we could talk about the pressure then to innovate that fintechs face. And Elliot, maybe, given that you work directly in this industry, maybe you could take this one. Can you talk about the pressure that fintechs face to be competitive and what that looks like on the ground?
Yeah, of course. I think the fintech industry in general is one that's just built on top of innovation, right? I think you can't have fintechs without innovation. You have these incredibly enormous incumbent banks who are very conservative. They've been operating for, in some cases, hundreds of years. And the fintech industry is really interesting where you have these small sparks of ideas that grow and scale incredibly quickly. And you look at the companies like Stripe, like us, like Square, who have just exploded by tackling these really hard problems in really novel ways that allow you to build better user experiences, cheaper offerings, faster offerings. But I think the challenge of innovation is understanding and meeting all of your regulatory risk requirements, understanding what your regulators are actually asking of you, and being able to meet those, not just checking the boxes along the way, but really meet the spirit of what they're requiring and being a good partner for those as well. I think being a fintech company, in some ways, is actually easier than being an incumbent. We have a lot less of this legacy infrastructure in the background. And so we have a lot more freedom and a lot more ability to build quickly, to innovate quickly, and also to meet new and emerging regulatory requirements quickly, which allows us to deliver a better user experience, which is also more secure and has compliance at its heart.
Excellent. Dan, I was mentioning cryptocurrency earlier. Could you talk about examples of the pressure to innovate, particularly in that subsector that you've seen as you talk to people in the industry?
In the crypto space, there is a number of different sort of, I'd say, markets. And, obviously there is the store of value market, like you can actually buy Bitcoin and hold it. And, like it's today inflation hedge or peg, et cetera. And then, but there are other additional cases like ledgers, smart contracts. So there was a lot of different business models that were being tried. And to be able to facilitate those things, there were specific domain-specific languages, for creating these crypto contracts, and so people can actually transact, and even I don't know if it's actually a reality today, but put a house your deed on a immutable like a ledger, and so all these things require a lot of innovation, and there are a lot of different companies who are trying to crack the next business model, just going beyond just having yet another market for storing Bitcoin. And while you're doing that, it's a very tech-forward industry. A lot of the users are themselves very tech-forward, and therefore it's very prone to attack. And so we've seen a ton of software supply chain attacks, just specifically targeting this industry. In fact, so much so that you look at the attack, you unpack the malicious code in the attack, and it's effectively designed to ignore every other use case, but just the moment that it knows that it's actually operating on a crypto wallet, and just try to siphon the wallet. And so I can't imagine a bigger target than that. So that's why a lot of motivated and also nation states were after these attacks, because it's a very, very lucrative business. So it was a perfect storm, and it remains to be a perfect storm.
Absolutely. I seem to remember, it seems like every other week there's a story about someone dropping a malicious library into PyPy or NPM that will steal your crypto signatures and stuff when you got them on your clipboard and that kind of stuff. Is that how you find people are distributing that kind of software that attacks the cryptocurrency supply chain?
Yeah, I think I forgot the name of this attack, but there was one on a utility library for, I think, Linux, for that. The attackers spent 2 years befriending the maintainer of the library, just so that they could take over or make a commit, and had a very obfuscated commit to effectively hide their backdoor. And I think it was detected by a Microsoft researcher who was bothered by a half a millisecond or a half a second latency increase on the library. It's like, why is this library's performance just moved by half a second or half a millisecond? I forgot. It was like a 500 millisecond or 500. Yeah, it was 500 millisecond latency spike. And so it was almost an act of chance, or God, if you will, that this researcher was curious about that. And this was going to be an entire backdoor into the, the Debian Linux system. And so super subtle attacks. And I feel like most of the attacks are really targeting, like if you take away the nation states trying to like listen on us and all that stuff, but just like the regular criminals, I'd say the vast majority of these people are targeting the fintech sector. So like it's a very, very difficult space to be in and then secure their, like assets and their code.
So let's get a fintech perspective on this. Elliot, you mentioned earlier that you saw the regulation, maybe as more of an opportunity than as a burden, which I find really interesting. It's a fairly unique perspective, I think, among people I speak to. As someone handling security at a fintech, then you live this reality every day, so you've got good reasons to say that. What's your take on it? Could you maybe elaborate on your attitude here?
Yeah, of course. I think as was mentioned, the potential downside is enormous working in fintech, right? We're managing people's funds. We have a lot of personal information about them to handle things like onboarding, and to provide a really great experience and one that's secure, you need a lot of data, which obviously puts you at enormous risk of a lot of attacks. We are a lucrative target. Every fintech is a lucrative target. And we have to invest, and we do invest a huge amount of time and money and effort into building a really secure platform. And when it comes to regulations and how that's kind of like an enabler for us, I think the specific thing is that being a modern business, having modern infrastructure, particularly compared to a lot of the incumbents, we're able to just innovate and move faster. And what this means is when there's a new set of regulations that come out, we're able to adopt them faster. And generally, if you look at the trend of how regulations emerge and kind of progress over time, they become more modern. They require more modern controls. They have more modern takes on particular like controls that they require. And so you end up in this position where you can adopt and continue to maintain modern best practices in security, which is an incredibly fast-moving sector of security, and still meet all of your regulators' requirements. So to give an example of this, we have PCI DSS 3.2. In that, if you look through a bunch of the requirements, there's some that would be considered outdated recommendations now around things like password rotations. NIST has long updated their advice around password policies and rotations. Microsoft has released like incredible research about how forced rotations and forced complexity build really bad security patterns. PCI DSS 4.0 comes out and it finally adopts NIST's actual good guidance. And because we want to build everything in a modern, scalable way that has really great user experience and really great security, we're able to basically tell our auditors the day it comes out, we want to be measured against this. And so we build a better internal set of controls that are easier to use, that have better security, and we can continuously adopt. And it's like a zero change issue for us. And so when we talk about it as an enabler, it's because we're able to adopt these modern controls and improve the quality of our product at the same time.
It's a pretty mature approach, like I say. What's the missing link that enables fintechs like yours to view regulation as an opportunity rather than a business challenge? What is it about your corporate approach that really enables you to foreground that?
Yeah, I think it's the fact that we try to have security orient itself as a enabler and an accelerator rather than one that's like simply applying controls. I think it's a bit of corporate governance, and it's actually the role of security and the perception of security. The world that we want to get to is one where we can have everyone in the business focusing on doing really great work, right? We want our product managers and our engineers to focus on building the best product that we possibly can, rather than thinking about security and the controls themselves. And so when we start to think about security as more of like a scalability issue and incorporating it more into other people's life cycles, we get much better outcomes. So if we can figure out how we can use the same tools as other parts of the business, if we can communicate in a way that's closer to what our employees expect to be communicated with, if we can kind of merge our world and theirs to deliver a better product that also happens to be more secure, that's a really great outcome.
Interesting. So it's almost like getting the controls and the tools out of the way, right? No one opens Microsoft Word to marvel at the beautiful user interface of Microsoft Word. They just want to get a job done, right? So it sounds like it's a similar kind of approach there. Okay, that's great stuff. So maybe just continuing with you for a second, Elliot. I wanted to understand how risk management plays into that then. So once you've kind of developed this corporate governance approach, or you have an idea that you want security to be part of corporate governance, could you talk about the role of managing risk within that within that context?
Yeah, of course. I think a strong part of the corporate governance story is that we need to obviously understand and manage security risk. But the way that we want to achieve that is we want to actually build this concept of risk management in a way that everyone else in the business understands it, right? I think if you go to a random engineer at any tech company and you talk to them about risk management, they're probably going to react poorly, right? Like they don't really understand it. Where they've heard about it in the past, there's a lot of overhead, there's a lot of documentation. It's things that like engineers don't really like. And what we try to do instead is actually teach people about the principles of risk management and how it can benefit them. And I think risk management is a lot like eating your vegetables, where it's really important and a lot of people don't like to do it. But a lot of vegetables are very poorly cooked. And if you cook them in the right way, people actually start to like them, right? And we've gone from a world of having this like risk management process that everyone saw as a bit of a tax to actually having our own risk management process copied by other parts of the business, which I think is quite cool. And I think that most incumbents and like most traditional organizations aren't very good at this. They're not able to communicate, assess, triage, really dig into risks in a way that meets their business. And they're like hyper dependent on the principles of risk management. I think a good example of this is something like vulnerabilities, where they'll take a queue, they have a big vulnerability management team, and they just kind of try and burn through the queue. Maybe they're using the CVSS score or just whatever's being reported by their vulnerability scanners. But that's really burdensome. It's very slow. When you have a risk scanner that runs and it reports 100 vulnerabilities, someone has to go through and actually review them. And that review process is time consuming. You have to look at configurations. You have to look at network configurations. Very difficult to do. And what we want to do instead is try and figure out how do we solve that as more of a like end-to-end solution? How do we automate away all of that triage process so that developers only have to deal with what they need to?
Interesting. Dan, well, what do you have to say about that? This idea that just chewing through, vulnerabilities based on a CVSS score perhaps isn't the right way to go, and what opportunities do fintechs have there to improve the way that incumbent financial institutions have done things?
I guess my first reaction to listen to Elliot is that necessity is the mother of all inventions. And we have a saying at Semgrep, I think we've plagiarized from somewhere, is that you can beat any grandmaster at chess if you can make 2 moves for every move they make. So speed is a strategy. And when you think about an established financial service company that has been around for hundreds of years versus a new fintech company, and to like how to gain that speed so that you can innovate and grow in markets where there are some really big dominant players. Well, to get that speed, you really need to engage with risk. And what I mean by engaging with risk is that without naming names, I'm just going to give you a very, I would say, lazy thinking about risk is that, well, if something pops up in a scanner, we have to deal with it. We have to document it. We have to write it. And in fact, we've been told many times by customers, please don't show us things, because if you show us things, we have to document it. But if you don't show us things, that's okay, because our policy says as long as it's not there, we don't have to deal with it. So naturally, like it's tongue in cheek, but it's a factual statement from a customer or at least a prospect. And so you realize that when people have a lazy way to engage with risk and understand, like if this is a real risk, systemic risk, or it's a sort of like a fake risk or like a false positive, if you will, these things do have big impact on the speed of the organization. So good and I'd say modern companies really have a good savvy understanding of their risk, and they really can understand, hey, is this happening? Is this thing relevant to my developers? Am I in the context where this risk matters to me? And obviously, the whole industry is trying to build features to really, really prioritize and contextualize risk to the customers. And, if you talk to every vendor, you pick up the phone and say, hey, do you guys contextualize risk? Everybody's going to say, of course we do. But that's half the story. The other half the story is that customers have to really sort of like operationalize that contextualization of the risk and say, yes, we do buy into this idea that if this thing is not a real threat to me in a way that my engineers, my developers can easily understand, then I don't have to worry about it as much as I worry about a real risk. Because the problem is that while you're worrying about, while you're distracted by bogus risk, you may be completely ignoring the real risk. And there's some great examples of that. I don't want to digress into the AI space, but that's another example. Is AI risk or reward for security? Well, that's another blog, like a webinar for you. But that's, so smart companies really kind of engage with the actual risk and try to sort of like sift through all these sort of like distractions to get to the heart of the matter. And that's how they move fast, because they can actually focus on the right thing.
So it's kind of like, moving from a see no evil, hear no evil approach, where you just put your head in the sand and hope for the best, to then being able to see everything, being completely omniscient, but understanding what you actually really need to look at, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, now that's good. So, and when we talk about these risks, Dan, we're really talking about software vulnerabilities as a big part of that. I mean, obviously, not the only risk, but they are a big part of what we're addressing here when we talk about risk. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, one very simple example, because the listeners of this, webinar will be practitioners, is that if you upgrade every library that your scanner tells you to upgrade because there's a potential vulnerability, that's going to take half your time, if not all your time. And people try to automate that, and then they break the production because like you're making an upgrade that you're not supposed to make. And so in the last 5 years, the industry has been working feverishly to come up with some different ways of contextualizing that risk. Hey, is that thing running in production, or is it some random internal library that nobody even uses? Or, okay, it's running in production. Is that library being used? Is that library is reachable? Am I using the function that is vulnerable in that library? So it goes on and on like that. And then you start with thousands of alerts to get to 5 or 6. And that's where you need to be, really. And now the rest should be taken care of and upgraded or cared for as a part of your sort of like scheduled maintenance cycles of your software. You should never have libraries that are 11, 12 years old, especially if they have, like a modern upgrades available. But so you got to get out of this, what we call the death treadmill of like upgrade. And we're not the only company doing that. There have been a bunch of innovative solutions, but I think that fintech has been exceptionally good at adopting these things because they have to.
Great. Okay, that's good. And so application security plays a big part, I guess, in managing this software vulnerability risk. So could you talk a bit about my understanding is that AppSec isn't actually on most CISO's radar at the moment. They're still looking at far more strategic issues, and that choosing an AppSec tool is a few levels below them. So, I mean, first off, is that correct? Are CISOs really cluing into this? Do they understand the importance of AppSec today?
Well, I have a personal sort of like story about that. I was reading feedback from a CISO who was actually a customer of ours, giving feedback to an investor in terms of like what keeps them awake at night. And, knowing that this investor was asking the CISO about, like, this is an investor that is interested in Semgrep, talking to a CISO that is actually a customer of Semgrep, I thought surely we're going to be at the top of the list. We were number 7 or 6. There's like compliance, there's governance, there's information security, and then you get into the cloud security, and finally there's AppSec. It is a part of the sort of like risk profile, but there are more important things for a CISO. And in different industries, software is like I would say that for a traditional manufacturing company, maybe software is not as risky or as like a mission critical as a fintech company. So these things change a bit, but it is definitely CISOs have a lot of things to sort of like worry about. And sometimes what we find is that for CISOs where compliance is far more important than security, application security can just be a check mark. Basically, hey, I just get a scanner because nobody tells me to do a good job. Maybe all the compliance tells me is that, hey, you got to scan your code and deal with it. So I'll just basically grab the cheapest or like the most convenient scanner off the shelf, ran with it, log the results, do something with those results, and I pass my audit. And so, yeah, you do pass your audit. Now, that's why we say compliance is not security. Our customers tend to be those who say, hey, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to mean security. And so I'm going to do it for real. So there is a real intentionality about not just dealing with the compliance part of the challenge, but also bringing security with it.
Great. Okay, that's good. And can you give me three sort of very concise benefits that application security will bring when you're dealing with corporate governance?
Um, I mean, there were examples. I think SolarWinds was one example where, the whole thing, I don't know, the impact to the entire organization was from an applications security attack vector. And Log4j vulnerability that came out was a near direct hit, and it was pretty much an open door, a remote execution sort of a threat vector to any organization using that library. And so, yes, this may not be as big of a threat as, like leaving your cloud open because you had a misconfigured AWS environment, but it can bring down organizations to their knees. And so I would say that sometimes CISOs who don't have a strong software background, if they don't have that strong software background, may tend to underestimate the risk of application security. But we've seen examples like SolarWinds where it can bring an entire organization and their leadership down.
Okay. Elliot, could you talk about how you've seen application security help you in your journey towards corporate governance?
Yeah, I think I agree with a lot of Dahan was saying. I think it's a difficult problem to solve, actually, application security. And I think the reason it's so difficult is that you need that strong software engineering background. I think if you look at the security industry trend, we're generally leaning more software engineering focused now. I think that's been a pretty big shift over the past 5 years. And so I think the understanding and the prioritization of application security risk will continue to increase. I actually think that we'll start to see it follow the same trend as what we've seen with your kind of traditional vulnerability management, where it goes from the hot topic and then a bunch of tooling is invented and then the scale is too big to fix, and then people find better tools, better ways to be able to prioritize and fix. I think we're seeing that kind of pattern start with tools like Semgrep at the moment as well. And for us, when we consider application security, it's not actually just about security, right? Like the goal with Semgrep at Airwallex as a customer is not just to set up some code scanning to find some like security vulnerabilities. I think it's like a pretty trivial, like not that interesting use case, but we're also trying to make it a shared tool between our security team and our engineering team. And the ideal state that we want to get to is one where we're not just using it to, like detect and avoid security vulnerabilities being written into any of our code base, but also that our engineers are using it to detect their own code anti-patterns, right? So they can write better code, cleaner code, more maintainable code, and using it as a way to actually improve how they achieve their outcomes.
Excellent. Okay, so it sounds as though you're trying to really embed security into development at a fairly early stage using this.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's a mixture of security by design, but also like shared tooling adoption and shared ownership. If you can achieve your security goals collaboratively, if you can achieve two goals of having a cleaner, more maintainable code base that's faster to iterate on, and it's also more secure, and the way that your security alerts propagate through is the same as any other of engineering's problems and how they typically think about those problems, you end up with a much better outcome. You end up with different teams being able to collaborate much more effectively with each other and also with our security team.
Excellent. Okay. And we've talked about AppSec in general, which of course has been around for many years, but we're really talking today about automation here and the potential for AI to help automate application security. Elliot, you've used this software for a while, with real world problems. Can you talk about the value of automation in the context of AppSec?
Yeah, sure. So AppSec is a very manual role at the moment. When you do it in the kind of trivial sense, as we were talking about earlier, you set up some scanner, you get some kind of not that useful results. There's pretty hands-off, and your developers get a bunch of alerts that they don't really find much value in, and so stuff happens, you have low conviction, but it ticks a box somewhere. What we're trying to get to is a world where we can achieve the really great AppSec outcomes that you would typically get by having a massive AppSec team, but without that number of people. I think AI is actually the path to achieving that. When you think about the typical roles that like a huge AppSec team would do, like in an ideal world, you would have someone review every PR with a security lens. you would have someone that's constantly digging into your code bases and being able to understand all of the different connected pieces so that the like obscure security vulnerabilities that accidentally get added get detected much earlier. I think AI actually unlocks that without the need for all of the people. You can feed your entire production code base into a model and have it be able to identify, or at least start to identify areas that might be higher risk. And when someone submits a PR, you're not just reviewing that PR and that slice of code, but you're also able to consider, what about the rest of the code base? What about the actual business context behind how your product works? Like, is this small PR actually part of a much bigger problem that you just can't see when you're looking at that little snippet? I think it allows you to take away the repetitive grunt work that only people were able to do in the past. But more importantly, it also frees up your AppSec team to go and work on the more interesting, much harder problems that aren't suited for AI, which is digging in at the design stages, being able to think about building really good paved roads for like your employees and your customers to get to better security outcomes.
Interesting. And you know, one of the things that we see, certainly with LLMs, you know, is that the AI and with machine learning in general, is that AI is designed to get better at what it does over time. It's designed to learn from its environment, from its experiences. Dagan, could you talk about that, about the idea of using AI application security to get better at software analysis and bug discovery over time?
Yeah. In fact, we've been bullish on AI very early on. And in fact, I think we had our first ChatGPT integration a couple of months after they, you know, like they came out. So, and the reason for that is that a twofold. One of them is from a customer-centric standpoint, which is if you look at a 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. day of an application security engineer, 10 minutes of that is fun. The rest is a lot of work. And like it's work in terms of triaging results. It's work in terms of creating the right level of ticketing and sending it to the developers and providing enough guidance to say, hey, you're a new developer and I'm coming to you with a security issue and I don't want you to get freaked out. Here's how you can solve it. It's easy. It's because imagine if somebody comes to you and say, hey, you have a broken, you know, functionality. Yeah, okay, I'll go ahead and fix it. But if you go to that same engineer and say, hey, you have a security problem here, then you know it raises up the, you know. So we see that developers are apprehensive to basically get these results without having enough context or guidance to know what to do with it, and they really have to go somewhere to seek that guidance and say, okay, if I have a security problem, can somebody please help me out how to solve that? So application security engineers spend a lot of time doing all these sort of like a repetitive work of triaging, providing guidance, you know, writing tickets and making sure that things are fixed. And so one big benefit of AI is that we can take a lot of those sort of like repetitive work away from the application security engineers, so they can really focus on real risk and do threat modeling, do design reviews, to understand, you know, like how to better work with security champions. We even can help them sort of customize a remediation so that, you know, not only we're good at finding things, but we can also be really, really good at effectively telling developers how to fix those things. In fact, better yet, we can make an auto PR, meaning that suggest a fix to the developer so that all the developer has to do is review the fix as opposed to create the fix. So that's how, in one way, from a customer angle, you can really take a day that is only 5 minutes fun to a day that is mostly fun. And so that's just like what we're trying to do from a customer standpoint. Internally, and I think this applies to any business, is that here's what's going on with AI. And this is, I'm just literally paraphrasing Sam Altman here. Not, you know, this is not my invention or anything like that. But you want to be in the positive sort of derivative curve of AI, meaning that if what you're delivering or your business gets disrupted every time AI gets better, you're on the negative curve of AI. If what you gets 2x better for every one incremental, you know, improvement by AI, you're on the positive curve of AI. That's where you want to be. And so the question we ask ourselves is, what used to be impossible that now is perhaps not easy, but at least possible? So a lot of the work we do internally is that a lot of big innovations or big bets that we wanted to do in the prior years, we said, wouldn't it be amazing if ... And we just, well, we can't do that. It's impossible. Well, guess what? A lot of those impossibles are slowly turning into possible. And the companies who basically move in that space the first are going to have that first mover advantage. Remember, I said that for us, speed is paramount, because if you can make 2 moves, for somebody is 1 move. And so for us, like, we really look at AI to allow us to make those 2 moves while everybody else is trying to make that 1 move.
Got it. Okay. Well, I mean, those benefits sound great. It sounds like it's going to be a useful asset to many companies, software development, corporate governance nexus. But where do we start? I mean, it's all very appealing. But if I'm a CISO and I know I need application security, but the specifics of all this are several levels below my pay grade, then what's my first step? And Elliot, maybe as someone that's presumably had to tackle this, you could take this one.
Yeah, I had the fortune or misfortune of being a software engineer for a while before I moved into security, so maybe not the right person. My natural inclination is I think you just actually need to learn the space. Credibility with your engineering team is paramount, right? Like, shared tooling really helps, but being able to speak to them and be credible as a software engineer, or credible enough, really helps to show that you understand the complexity of the problem and that you're not just coming to them with some problem that you don't understand. I think past that, it's also making sure that you are attracting the right attention and the right audience. I think, like, as the CISO, you need to be able to communicate AppSec alongside all of your other risks that are actually slightly easier to understand if you're a less technical audience. For a company like us, I think, I mean, I'm personally very fortunate. Like, our CEO and our CTO are both, like, very deeply invested in security. We have very strong, like, engineering leadership, and so we have very good partnerships there. But I think you need to effectively arm, like, your board, your CEO, whoever you need to understand what those risks are, figure out how to communicate them in a way that they'll understand them really deeply and know how to actually start to fix them, and show how you're working collaboratively with the different teams that need to be involved to be able to get to the outcome that you need.
Dan, that's an interesting point, isn't it? I mean, a software developer, an ex-software developer, speaks about the importance of this. How do we engage our developers? How do we make sure that we don't ignore our developers? People like Elliot in his former role, when we're actually rolling these things out. I mean, I imagine they're going to be fairly valuable allies in all this.
I think Elliot covered this a little bit, that the profile of CISO is shifting to far more software-centric, whereas in the past it used to be a lot more GRC, governance, risk, and control centric. So in fintech specifically, we see a lot of these tech-forward, software-savvy CISOs. And it helps because, if nothing else, they have context and they have empathy because they've done the job. They walked in their shoes. And when you are creating policies in the company that are sort of like broad brush and miss the nuances of how developers work, it's going to impede their productivity. And they're very sensitive to that. Developers are proud, just like all of us. We show up to work, produce good results, and have a output that matters. And if we find ourselves doing work that we think it's mostly say repetitive or maybe futile, it's going to create burnout. And so I worked with one customer in Singapore, and I told them, you are so powerful, you're nearly like monopolistic in your territory, why do you care about this modern stuff? And the CISO's answer is that, because if I don't, my developers resign and they quit on me. And so, having a sort of a modern approach to software security is actually going to create a better productivity environment for developers to collaborate with you. We have a lot of people who come to us and say, hey, I want to work with you because my developers are ignoring me and I don't want that. And so, one side of the token is, making the company go fast, all that. But the other part is that you have colleagues who are suffering the consequences of your decisions because you're making policy and tool choices for another, sort of group of people. And having an enormous amount of empathy for them will only help.
Cool. Okay. And the other aspect of this, once you have got your developers on board and you've gotten them excited about this opportunity, is to automate the workflows, to presumably make things as smooth as possible. So, Elliot, could you maybe take that one? Could you talk about how you can automate your workflows so that the tool essentially disappears, as we talked about earlier?
Yeah, as I said earlier, I think the ideal outcome for a lot of security controls is that they're not seen as security controls, right? You want to build the fastest, easiest, best product that your employees can use to achieve their goal. And kind of like sneaking vegetables into like kids' food, you also want them to adopt all of your little security controls on the way and almost not realize that they're there. Security, I think, should be visible, but in like non-traditional ways. I think the security controls that you implement should be really important and critical to actually being able to ship a really great product and be able to achieve all of your security and compliance outcomes. But your security controls shouldn't be about security. They should be flowing behind the scenes to give you better assurance about the security of whatever you're building. I think integrating application security really deeply into your existing development processes is really critical to this. Figuring out, like if I was going to build my AppSec program from scratch today, I would go and have a look from the moment the first line of code gets written, or even further upstream, like the moment the first design doc gets written, what are all of the stages that that idea goes through before it eventually turns into code and gets pushed into your product? And figure out, how do I embed my controls in that process, not put them kind of like vertically along the process, right? I want to go with the process rather than block it at different points. And this means hooking into CI/CD, figuring out how you can automatically deploy changes that way, figuring out how you actually get the right eyes on the right RFCs rather than reviewing everything, making it really easy for the security team to review things that may need a human review, but in a non-blocking way, sharing tooling, integrating into your like test suite, that kind of thing. I think you want to focus on integrating your application security, not just like through development and security testing, but you also want to think about your like end compliance monitoring and regulatory reporting that you might need to do as well, and solving that as like an end-to-end product.
Excellent. Okay, and then once you've managed to do that and create a solid workflow with automation for AppSec built in, how can you tie it back to meeting regulatory controls? You know, it's great that developers feel safer, but how does that help fintechs to convince the regulators that you're on top of this? And Elliot, as someone that works really closely with regulators, maybe you could talk about this one too.
I think it's largely documentation. I think it's almost translation is kind of how I would frame it, where the language that your business probably speaks is probably different to what the language your regulators speak, which is also going to be different to the language that like your partners and your vendors are going to speak as well. And I think reporting application security alongside kind of all of your other security metrics that you'd want to, in a language that other people understand, is a real skill here. For us, what this looks like is working really closely with regulators, building relationships, and helping them understand not just that we meet what's required, right, whatever's in the regulations, but they're actually exceeding them in a bunch of ways, talking about the meaningful risks that we have, why we're concerned about them, and what we're doing about it. And we apply this to our partners as well. So when we get a request to fill out a security questionnaire from a partner, we'll typically go back to them and say, thanks for sending this through. We'll probably fill this out, but if you want to just spend 30 minutes talking about what we really care about, what the risks are that are really important to us, then we can do that. We can have that conversation. We can build a good relationship. I can, get to know what your problems are. You can hear more about mine, and then we can have like a more effective relationship going forward.
Got it. Okay. Well, this has been just really helpful. I think beyond the regulators, but maybe one final question is whether there are any other reasons to build a data-driven corporate governance policy that embraces software security. Dahan, I think I'll ask you that one. Just very quickly summarize if there's anything we've missed here in terms of drivers for this stuff.
No, I think Ellie did a great job. We have some Palantir alumni at Semgrep too. It's a remarkable security organization, so I expected nothing less. But maybe one thing that I would add is that our take into AppSec as part of the risk management for a modern enterprise is that no one size fits all. Every company is impacted by the Pareto principle of 80-20, meaning that the 80% of your risk is covered by 20% effort, but the long tail is where the real effort is. So we as a company and a product philosophy have worked very hard to create the extensibility and the customizability that at least in the application security level, so that everybody can take Semgrep and run with it and really make it their own in terms of their own program. And so our approach to like really covering that 100% of that risk profile is that we want to give you the Lego blocks so that you can build the security that you wanted to build with Semgrep.
Great stuff. Okay, well, this has been a great discussion. Thanks so much for that. Now we'd like to cover some of the questions that audience members have asked. And one of the first ones I see here is, what application security metrics should I be reporting to the board? Elliot, I'm going to ask you to take that one, because this is something you do presumably on a fairly regular basis.
Yeah, I think it depends on your business is the kind of cheat answer here, but I think it's still the correct one. From my perspective, I think with any board reporting, I think the art is reporting on what is important and what your board members actually care about. So for this, I think you figure out what are the most important metrics to your security program, and then you orient around that. That might be something around resilience, like how long does it take just to rebuild your company in the worst case? You might report on things like how long it takes to remediate something that you know is bad, not just like, the critical reported vulnerability, but the thing that's actually been assessed and triaged and understood. How long does it actually take to fix something like that? But I think other things that are really important and interesting is just going through, honestly, just the news from the past month or whatever, having a look to see what are the AppSec vulnerabilities that have come out in that time, and being able to talk about what your exposure was and how you actually addressed it. I think being able to anchor those discussions and real world examples that actually arms your board members with questions they can go and ask other companies is a really effective way to like build the buy-in and engagement and credibility.
Excellent. Okay. I think one of you talked earlier about getting development teams and security teams to work together. And one of the things that someone's asked here is, what kinds of conversations should these two contingents be having, and how often should they be speaking? Dahan, maybe you want to take that one?
My observation is that companies who have really successfully embraced the security champions culture have really did well in this space. And so effectively, you want to embed your own agents, if you will, in the security organization. And the best way to do that is the Security Champions program. I really think that from a people's tools process standpoint, this is probably the best people's investment you can do to really invest in the Security Champions program, because it really removes this sort of recipe of, you got to be 3 hours a week or 7 hours a day type, like sort of like a dry recommendation. The idea is that there should be somebody in the security organization, because guess what? Engineers care about reliability. If the website is down or it's slow, they're going to know it and they're going to like go fix it. They should have the same level of ownership about security. Security isn't somebody else's job that they tell you to do and you go fix it. It's just an integral part of software development process. And the best way to get that started is really have that champion in the organization, in the developer organization, as opposed to coming from a different team once a week or every scheduled meeting to kind of like pontificate about security. It has to be native to the development organization.
Brilliant. Someone else here has gone straight to the nub of the question. He asks, or she asks, how much time can I save per developer per month by using automation? So that they want the numbers. Either of you, can you speak to that?
I don't actually have good metrics on this. I think it's a difficult one to measure, because I think the real metric that you care about is how many real issues are you fixing, and is that number trending in the way that you would expect it to? Obviously, if you are developing new features, if you're writing more code, then you should expect to see more issues fixed. But I think if you're also looking at using something like Semgrep, because you're building kind of like the self-perpetuating cycle of being able to discover more vulnerabilities over time and have them fixed earlier, you may also want to look at how many repeated issues are you preventing per month using automation and tooling.
I think related automation, the only hard number I can give is that we did a study about all the organizations that are using our AI sort of remediation engine versus the organization who chose not to use it. And we saw that there's a 2x delta between the fix rates in terms of, let's say, on average, one organization is fixing 5 issues per unit time. the orgs on average who are using AI are fixing twice as much. That was really stark and remarkable. We wrote a whole blog post about that. And so that's why one of the things that I'm trying to communicate to CISOs is that, yeah, there are some perceived risks with AI, but also there's tremendous security benefits of using AI the right way.
Brilliant. Okay, and another one maybe for both of you, because I think both of you have an opinion on this. Where is AI headed in application security, and what will it be able to do in the future? Elliot, do you have any thoughts on that first?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on this. I think if you follow the trends of AI generally, I think it's a world in which your AppSec team is just focused on the most business-specific, difficult, complex, and human problems in this space, and it's more about figuring out where and how to apply AI more effectively, rather than kind of separating the work out. I think the short term of this is what we're already starting to see, which is like distributed PR reviews, being able to tie business risks to like code changes, that kind of thing. Helping people understand the risks that they're introducing. So, if something looks like a vulnerability, if you explain why it's a vulnerability, your developer might be able to say, oh, but those conditions are not true, therefore it's fine. But I think in the future, what I hope is the ability to, read every line of code, review every single change, read every document that's ever produced, and from there be able to understand the comprehensive picture of what is the business, what is the product, what does it do, and how do these small little changes impact that bigger picture. I think that'd be a super exciting world to work towards.
Big shopping list there, Elliot, but hopefully we can get you there. Dahan, what about you? Maybe just in the last 60 seconds before we wrap it, anything you have to add there?
Yeah, I think anything past the next 24 months is impossible to predict. We're in like unprecedented times. Like somebody was saying, this is like the invention of transistor. But within the next 24 months, I think the immediate obvious benefit is that whatever happened to be the lowest bottom of repetitive tasks we used to do is being replaced by AI, and it's steadily growing up on the value chain. So we're going to try to make sure that repetition is a thing of the past, especially for the AppSec teams.
Brilliant. Okay, well, wonderful discussion again. I certainly learned a lot today. I'd love to thank both of you, Dahan and Elliot, for a great discussion. We appreciate you sharing your insights and expertise with us. I'd also like to thank you, our audience, for joining us today. We hope to see you again soon, and have a great day.